There comes a moment in every season when the silence becomes louder than noise. A moment when even the wind holds its breath. That moment is now. July 30 is not just a day on a calendar. It is a threshold. The final warning has arrived, and it is not chaos that carries it, but clarity. And to those who claim to walk in light, the time has come to pause and ask, have we truly been listening? A warning from above is not always fire from the sky. More often, it is the withdrawal of presence, the dimming of awareness, the closing of the door that was once wide open. The church, the body of those who call themselves aligned with divine, has for too long replaced devotion with display, humility with hierarchy, silence with shouting. You can only hear the divine if the noise within you has been silenced. This is the discipline that has been lost. See, the church has forgotten the stillness and thus lost its hearing. In a world dominated by movement, noise, and relentless distraction, the sacred art of stillness has become almost alien. But it is in that stillness where the divine speaks. When the soul is calm, the heart is open, and the mind is unburdened by judgment, the whisper of heaven becomes clear. Yet today, many who claim to walk in the light have turned away from the essential discipline. They chase excitement, inspiration, and signs. But the ancient wisdom has always taught that God is not found in the earthquake, nor the fire, but in the still small voice. When one abandons stillness, they become deaf not because they lack ears, but because they have filled their lives with too much noise. The church, which once was the lighthouse of clarity and inner strength, now too often echoes the patterns of the world. Services are loud, agendas are packed. Messages are crafted for applause, and hearts are filled with anxiety masked as zeal. This is not how the early seekers met God. They met him in the wilderness, in caves, on mountaintops, in the deep night when all the world had fallen silent. Stillness is not the absence of action, it is the foundation of wise action. From stillness arises clarity. From stillness, the soul sees what the rushing mind cannot. In silence, the invisible becomes visible. But when a community, a people, or a church forgets stillness, it no longer sees clearly. It interprets confusion as revelation, restlessness as purpose. It becomes a ship lost in fog, guided only by the echo of its own voice. There is danger in this kind of forgetting, because when the soul is not trained to be still, it is easily manipulated. It reacts instead of reflects. It follows rather than discerns. It speaks, but does not understand. How many today gather to hear from God, but leave unchanged because they never learned to first quiet themselves? They cry out, "Speak to us," but do not pause long enough to hear the response. The divine is not mocked by volume or persistence. It responds to readiness. Stillness is the posture of the ready soul. Throughout sacred history, every prophet, every mystic, every awakened heart came to know one thing. Silence is the threshold to understanding. But silence does not simply mean the absence of sound. It means the stilling of the heart, the calming of thoughts, the grounding of the body. It is a whole being discipline, and without it, the church becomes a place of frantic movement. Even devotion, when not rooted in stillness, becomes performance. Without silence, prayer becomes noise. Without stillness, worship becomes routine. Without inner calm, even truth becomes a burden. The voice of God is not a shout over the crowd. It is a whisper that can only be heard when the soul leans in, ready, empty, humbled. But how can a people hear when their minds are crowded agendas, opinions, fears, and pride? This is the warning that now arrives. The final invitation to return to stillness. July 30 is not about doom. It is about recognition. The divine voice is speaking, not in thunder but in silence. The church must prepare to hear again, not with outer ears, but with the deep listening of the inner life. A life that is slow, steady, present. Not reactive, not loud, not distracted. Stillness is not inactivity. It is the doorway to divine activity. When the church becomes still, it remembers. It remembers who it serves. It remembers how to walk humbly. It remembers that God is not summoned by noise, but welcomed through stillness. If the church wants to truly hear again, it must turn off the distractions, silence the inner storm, and learn again to wait. To wait with reverence. To wait with simplicity. Because the divine voice does not compete with chaos. It waits patiently in the quiet place where few dare to go. And now, time is short. The invitation has not been revoked, but the urgency has increased if the church does not reclaim the sacred posture of stillness. It will mistake noise for wisdom. It will follow the world's patterns, thinking it is walking in divine rhythm. The price of forgetting stillness is high, but the reward for remembering it is beyond words. Because in stillness, the soul meets God not as a distant judge, but as an intimate presence. And only in that sacred space when the divine speaks what is being spoken. It is not thunder but silence that carries the warning. Human beings have come to associate power with volume, presence with noise, and urgency with chaos. But the sacred voice does not conform to human assumptions. It flows like water, quiet, persistent, shaping everything without needing to raise its tone. This is the paradox. The most urgent messages from heaven are often delivered in the gentlest ways. And those who are too loud within cannot hear the whisper without. What happens when humanity expects God to shout, but he chooses to remain silent? Many miss the message entirely, they ask. Why has heaven gone quiet, when in truth the silence is the message? In moments of deep significance, the absence of sound is not absence of presence. It is the intensification of meaning. The divine does not chase your attention. It tests your readiness to perceive. A warning in silence requires a different type of listening. Not with ears, but with spirit. Not with emotion, but with awareness. The divine voice is not always heard, but it is always felt by those attuned to its vibration. This is why silence is so uncomfortable to the untrained heart. In silence, the soul becomes exposed. In silence, the truth cannot be hidden behind noise. Silence is the mirror in which the soul must face itself, and many are not ready to do so. But if one truly desires to hear what the divine is saying in this final hour, they must go beyond the external signs and enter the inner sanctuary where all true revelations begin. July 30 is not about outward signs. It is about inner stillness. The warning is not carved in lightning or spoken from clouds. It is carried in the hush before the storm, in the quiet that descends just before a great shift. To ignore this type of warning is not simply to miss a message. It is to remain asleep when the time to awaken has come. A person can be surrounded by truth, but still live in blindness if they refuse to be still. Those who expect God to speak on their terms will always misunderstand him. The divine does not argue. It does not shout to be heard over the crowd. It simply stops speaking. And that is often the most terrifying warning of all. Silence from heaven is not absence. It is restraint. It is mercy allowing time for awakening. It is grace giving space for correction. But that window does not remain open forever. Every spiritual tradition has taught that the truly wise do not wait for the shaking of the ground to begin their transformation. They listen when the winds change. They sense the unseen. They move before the fire falls. And what enables this sensitivity is not intellect, emotion, or position. It is inner stillness. Only those who have cultivated silence can interpret silence. That is why the call for the church in this hour is to stop speaking long enough to listen, to empty itself of assumptions, to step away from the spotlight and into the cave, because the voice of God will not interrupt performance. It will only enter places of surrender. And if that surrender does not come, then the silence deepens. And in that deepening, the warning becomes final. What is this warning saying? It is saying that the church must change its posture, that the age of pretending to listen is over, that the divine will not be mocked by ceremonies that lack presence or declarations that lack obedience. The silence is the final opportunity. It says, I am still here, but I will not compete with your distractions. It says, I am speaking, but not to the surface, only to those who have gone deep. July 30 marks a threshold, not of catastrophe, but of accountability. What has been tolerated will be judged. What has been ignored will be revealed. And what has been spoken in silence will now demand a response. So the question is not whether God is speaking, He is. The real question is whether the church has tuned its hearing, whether it has emptied itself of pride, of assumptions, of performance, whether it has learned to bow in the unseen, to listen without demand, to receive without conditions. For those who have ears to hear, the silence is not absence, it is invitation. But for those who ignore it, the silence becomes judgment. To obey is not emotion, it becomes the echo of what could have been heard. The church must return to inner discipline. If only they had learned how to listen. In many spiritual environments today, obedience has been reduced to emotional response. A stirring message, a moving song, a tearful prayer. And these are seen as evidence of transformation. But true obedience is not found in moments of emotion. It is found in the quiet, consistent alignment of life with divine order. Emotion may stir the heart, but only discipline transforms it. Many mistake spiritual enthusiasm for maturity, but they are not the same. Enthusiasm rises and fades. Discipline remains. It is the unshaken commitment to walk rightly, even when there is no feeling, no applause, and no outward reward. This is what the church has largely forgotten. That obedience is not a feeling, it is a practice. It is not a mood. It is a way of being. To be aligned with the divine means more than quoting sacred texts or attending rituals. It means to live in such a way that your thoughts, your speech, your habits, your reactions, your silence, all reflect a harmony with something higher. It means that your life becomes a vessel, not of your desires, but of sacred design. When the church loses this posture, it may still appear spiritual on the surface, but it lacks substance. It builds noise without depth, presence without purity. Alignment requires examination. It demands that each member of the body of believers look not just at what they do, but at who they are becoming. Are their actions rooted in discipline or in impulse? Are their commitments guided by values or by moods? There is no alignment without correction, and correction is only possible when the heart is humble enough to receive instruction. Many resist this, believing that grace means freedom from structure. But grace was never meant to replace discipline. It was meant to empower it. A grace is not permission to drift, it is power to realign. The divine order is not chaotic. It is precise, balanced, and structured. To live under that order is not to be burdened, but to be grounded. Discipline brings freedom, because it releases the soul from the tyranny of its own impulses. It teaches the body to serve the spirit, the mind to obey wisdom, and the emotions to follow truth. In this final warning, the church is being asked not to feel more, but to align more. Not to be louder, but to be more disciplined. The outer forms match the inner realities. Worship without integrity is hollow. Service without consistency is unstable. Speech without obedience is noise. The divine does not ask for occasional intensity, but for daily faithfulness. This means returning to the forgotten practices, not as lifeless traditions, but as pathways to realignment. Silence, reflection, self-examination, fasting, simplicity, honesty. These are not outdated relics. They are the tools through which the soul is shaped into alignment with the sacred. Without discipline, there is no transformation. Without structure, there is no strength. And without alignment, there is no obedience. The church must stop measuring spiritual health by emotion and start measuring it by alignment. How closely does its life reflect the nature of the one it claims to follow? This is the question that must be answered not with words but with practice. July 30 stands as a reminder that time is not to be wasted in mere religious activity. The divine is calling for a people who are not moved by emotion alone, but by commitment. A people who respond not just in the moment, but over the long journey. A people who do not just hear the call, but live the call. Daily, humbly, consistently. Real obedience will never be flashy. It is not about external show. It is about quiet courage, persistent effort, and the willingness to be shaped. It is the decision to rise each day and walk the path, even when the path is hard and the sky is silent. This is the obedience the divine seeks. This is the alignment the church must return to. Anything less is deception. Anything less is noise. In this final hour, the choice is clear: remain moved by emotion and drift in forgetfulness, or return to discipline and walk in divine order. Only one leads to life. Only one leads to truth. And the time to choose is now.